Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode with Chat with Chet. I am grateful to have Michael Wood today with me as my guest. Michael, go ahead and let you introduce yourself.
Sure. Mike Wood. I am the Vice President of Public Sector here at Spectro Cloud. Been over here for about a year and a half. Helped stand up the public sector over here. Spectro Cloud's about a 5-year-old company. Public sector is about a year and a half old. Come from some Kubernetes background, so I'm pretty versed in Kubernetes and happy to have some time to talk with Chet.
No, I appreciate it. And you hit on the topic, Kubernetes. That's lots of conversation right now. Everybody, at least we see it a lot in the government space, organizations trying to figure out what to do with Kubernetes. I'm interested in your take, right? And when we were prepping for this, we chatted about it a little bit. I think people believe Kubernetes is hard
Mm-hmm.
and complicated. And I'm interested in what you're seeing and your perception of that take, and maybe what are some of the ways that organizations can maybe approach leveraging Kubernetes to help their lives a little bit, make it a little bit better.
Yeah. So Kubernetes is still difficult, right? It's a complicated technology to um, orchestrate containers, and containers are a whole different topic. But it is a complicated technology, and if you go back, say 5-7 years ago, it was really scary, right? People are like, oh, I want to move to Kubernetes, but I need to have these subject matter experts. I need to be able to leverage actually full-time employees, and there's not a lot of people who are that caliber that could stand up Kubernetes clusters and manage them. And at my previous role, we would send people all over the world to go into these even war zones to work on Kubernetes that were flying on drones or some kind of aircraft. So it is and still can be complicated. But what we've done is kind of taken that complexity and scariness away and turned it into more of a, hey, it's just software. So if we look at it as just software and we're able to manage multiple distributions of it and kind of leverage, as we get into this conversation, the whole stack, it becomes a lot easier. And the tool that we've created at Spectro Cloud allows us, or someone like me, to be able to build a Kubernetes cluster, right? And deploy it to wherever I need to deploy it. And I'm not an engineer. I'm just kind of a semi-technical sales guy. And it allows me to do something that's been super complicated and super scary and kind of dumb it down to point and click and deploy. And then I can worry about some other things.
No, I think that's key here. I've talked to a lot of folks, and a few years ago, a lot of the conversation was around, hey, which distro am I going to use? And I think today going forward, I don't think that's no longer the case, right? I think organizations have an opportunity now. They can pick whichever distro they feel is right, not have to worry about necessarily locked in. They may even use one distro for something, another distro for something else. But now there's a better way to be able to manage that, per se.
Yeah, so the distribution conversation has been a major kind of impacting piece of Kubernetes. Like people will be, I subscribe to this kind of feeling of I want to use this distribution because I'm used to it, I'm trained on it, it's ATO'd, whatever the answer is. We take the approach that all Kubernetes distributions are pretty much the same, right? Well, aside from maybe some little nuances and maybe a certification, they all kind of do the same thing. Um, we look at the distribution of Kubernetes as just a commodity. It's just another piece of software. So we are able to ingest and manage and deploy multiple distributions of Kubernetes. So if you want to use a Rancher or a Google or an AWS or a Tanzu, whatever it might be, you can still use that distribution and that skill set with Spectro Cloud. We just provide an easier way to manage, deploy, and update all of those clusters without having to go through the nuances of command line or API code or anything like that, unless that's your skill set. It's not my skill set, right? I'm the clicky kind of deploy kind of guy. So our tool allows you to be as flexible as you need to be based on your skill set, while still leveraging existing investments and skill sets of software that you've already kind of come accustomed to using.
Yeah, and you hit on something there, and maybe this will take us down a rabbit hole. We'll see. But you talked about all these different distributions, but I also think this gives organizations the ability to really help them in their hybrid cloud type of model. And as organizations are deploying, whether they're deploying in AWS or GCP or Azure, or even in that model where they're still on-prem and they're trying to move back and forth, I think the concept of Kubernetes in general, and as well as something like Spectro Cloud, can help organizations make that a whole lot easier and truly give them platform agnostic type of infrastructure.
Yeah, so with our platform, it's the interaction to wherever you're deploying it to, whether it be a cloud, an on-prem, bare metal with canonical metal as a service or MAS, or even an edge device, is all the same interaction. And there's some kind of IP and some other stuff wrapped around it that's just way deeper than I can go. But basically, it allows you to move and shift as needed. For example, if today you're deploying to Amazon Web Services and the cost is X, and then 3 weeks from now you're like, oh my God, they changed their costing structure. I can't afford this. I got to move quickly to Azure. Well, it's just a click, drop down, click to Azure, reconfigure the cluster, update it, and then send it off. It's not my world's on fire. Oh my God, I got to rip everything out and start over. It's just a matter of updating that particular layer of the stack and push out the new cluster to wherever they need to go to. And we utilize Cluster API to do a lot of that, and we inject it from the operating system all the way up to the application. So that allows us to shift and move quite easily between deployment and software versions and Kubernetes versions, operating system, database, load balancer, whatever the layer might be. It allows us to switch and move at a moment's notice based on conditions that you're kind of aware of, and then things that might shock you. Like all of a sudden, this distribution is not supported anymore. What do I do? Well, you just swap it out for something else and put a new Lego block in, and you're good to go.
No, and I think that is one of the more powerful aspects of what Kubernetes allows for, and definitely what Spectral Cloud allows for. You talk about being able to go in and click, if you will, and make these changes. We are definitely seeing an uptake in this concept. More of a declarative model of how things get configured and things. I'm interested in your take on what kind of benefits the public sector and the government agencies can get from this declarative model, and how that helps them, and how that can help support the mission.
Yeah, so making declarative models, or we call them blueprints too, allows you to say, this is the golden image that we want to use for this particular program or this particular project or these particular groups, whatever it might be. We have really deep RBAC controls, so we can control a lot of granular things all the way up to kind of just broad things. Um, but when you have this kind of blueprint, you have this model and you have it locked down essentially. And we have something called reconciliation loops, which is basically self-healing. So if someone tries to make an unauthorized change to a particular layer or something within the cluster, it'll reconcile every 2 minutes and say, this guy tried to change something. That wasn't something that I saw as being authorized by a user. I'm going to revert back to the last known state and then keep running. So by creating this kind of declarative model, it allows you to have a standardized, repeatable, scalable distribution of Kubernetes clusters without having to do a lot of manual labor in deciding, who needs to do what and where. It's a lot of configuration and then just take it from a repo and then push it out to where it needs to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that sort of tails nicely into both the concept of application modernization, but in addition to that, security, compliance,
Mm-hmm.
right? All these things sort of come together, and organizations are trying to figure it out all at once. And the concept of application modernization, I've got, well, less of it, but it's more gray than it was 20 years ago. But 20 years ago, we were talking to folks. It was about modernization, and here we are. 20 years later, the conversations are still, we're talking about modernization. So how do you think both Kubernetes and Spectral Cloud come together to help deal with both of those things, right? The application modernization aspect of it, in addition to helping enhance security and making sure the organizations are compliant.
Yeah, so we integrate within our stack or our capabilities. We integrate with 54 applications out of the box. So a lot of those applications are very common things that people are already using. So we allow you to bring that investment in and not kind of pre-describe what you must use. Additionally, when we're talking about security, we've gone through the process of making sure that we're FIPS 140-2 compliant. we're going through FedRAMP to make sure that we meet those requirements. So we really put a lot of investment and time in making sure that we are meeting the criteria to work in IL4, IL5, IL6, and to make our product TRL9 so it's ready to go for deployments in whatever system it might need to go into. As far as like modernization, I think modernization kind of denotes like you need to be able to be modern today as well as modern in 20 or 30 years, right? So you don't want to be stuck into a pre-confined, locked-in distribution or locked-in infrastructure for X number of years. We allow you to use whatever makes sense to you, not kind of what we tell you need to use, whatever makes sense for you. And we allow you to, and one of the taglines is we allow you to build your Kubernetes distribution, what that makes sense to you. Even if you decide 3 years from now and you don't want to use us, you're still able to do a lot of things without our tool set because we allow you to have freedom and flexibility. And I think that's part of app modernization. Not only getting up to speed to the 21st century, but then looking into the next decade or the next century and being able to shift and move as new software comes out, as new distributions come out, and kind of take that Lego block and then swap something out and put something new in. And it will auto configure and make sure that that's a stable configuration. And then, again, just deploy to wherever you want to deploy it to.
Yeah. And I know you're familiar a lot with the different software factories. There's a lot of efforts going on across the DoD and other areas with this concept of a software factory. What are you seeing across these factories around their adoption of Kubernetes, and what kind of impact is that having to the different missions that are leveraging these different factories out there?
Yeah, I think a lot of the software factories had a lot of promise and they had a lot of good intentions. I don't think they really kind of got to where they were trying to get to yet. Some of them haven't really deployed any software in a couple of years, and you kind of wonder, what are they doing, right? And I think it comes down to the predefined kind of lock-in software that they've been purchasing and using to build their software factory or to model their software factory. I think when you're looking at how do you get something as quickly as possible, as secure as possible, and deploy as soon as possible, you need to look at a tool kind of like us. Maybe you don't want to use us, but you need to look at something kind of like us to be able to stand that up quickly and start with a level kind of platform that allows you to do all of that. We are working with a majority of the software factories. Some of the larger ones we're working with to help deploy their hardened containers and hardened software that goes through their pipeline and their process to make sure that it's as pure and as secure as possible, and then be able to deploy that repeatably and securely, not only to our own U.S. government entities, but to foreign entities in the Five Eyes, but also be able to do that in like an air gap type situation. So deploy those applications, run them, and if for some reason they get disconnected from the internet, we don't care, right? We're still running in those applications and they're still running as business as usual. And we have this kind of concept where either it's completely air gapped and there's no outside connection, or you have some random connection like a drone or a submarine that comes up for air once in a while, reconnects to the system, downloads software, updates software, and then goes underwater for 3 months. All of that is all possible with a tool like ours that's been built to be both connected and disconnected.
Yeah, and I think definitely lots of good use cases across the DoD in that regard, and I think there's a compelling story to be able to tell the story all the way from, hey, we full on connected data centers, cloud, AWS, blah blah blah, all the way down to the fact that, hey, there may be these drones or these other ships or submarines out there that can leverage, again, the same software base, and we can, deploy across that entire spectrum. I think there's huge value to that.
Yeah, it's not like we're making you update all of your hardware too. We're doing a lot of this on existing hardware, and some of it, as we know, is not cutting edge, right? It's been in service for 5, 10, 15, 30 years. So to be able to do that app modernization or software development modernization or security modernization on older systems and give that kind of bridge from the old to the existing to the new is another feature of what we do at Spectro Cloud.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm going to go back. One of the things we last talked about, and I liked your analogy, this concept of manager of managers. and that concept of future proofing the organization's environment. Maybe elaborate that on a little bit more, because I thought that was quite interesting. I think worthwhile for agencies to think about and consider.
Right. So if you're looking at typical software or Kubernetes clusters, every distribution company makes you use their manager to manage their distribution. So what happens with that is you get these silos, right? You have a Rancher silo, a D2IQ silo, a Tanzu silo, a Red Hat silo, and so on and so forth. So every time you need to do an update or a patch or even configurations or just see the health of clusters in those silos, you have to log into every single one of them. What Spectro Cloud does is it sits over on all of those. So you import all of those clusters and those capabilities and that information and those nuances into Spectro Cloud, and you can manage or review or deploy whatever the case may be on the particular silo. You're able to do that from Spectro Cloud. So you have I hate that term, but single pane of glass of everything in those silos. And then if you want to, you can import new ones. You can start to develop and then export new clusters. It really gives you an overview of everything that's in your environment without having to constantly log in and out of every separate silo every single time.
Yeah, and again, another one of those compelling things that I think worthwhile for organizations to consider.
It's really a time
Um,
saver, right? Because you don't want to have
yeah,
to worry about. Of course, we all get this situation where you got to update your password. You're in the middle of something and you have to update your password, and that can be a nuisance. But if you have all these silos and it's taking time to not only log in and manage situations from every silo, but then in some situations, every silo, in order to update their clusters, it's a manual process, right? And or the management of that particular distribution only allows you to do so much. Our system allows you to be, again, declarative and kind of separated, and allows you to manage and deploy thousands of clusters from a single click. So if one cluster is updated and it's tied to several different distributions of that silo or that cluster, then you can just update them all in minutes as opposed to hours and weeks or days, which we have done for many customers. We've proven a lot of people kind of skeptical, and I agree, it's a skeptical kind of conversation that we can do so much in such a short period of time. But some large organizations have kind of challenged us to do that, and we've gone in and prove it, and they just kind of shook their head and said, I didn't think this was possible. And I think that's where we're at, is like a lot of times we get in front of people and they're like, I didn't even know this type of thing was possible. And when we show them, their eyes kind of gloss over and like, I could apply this to so many different locations.
yeah, and you may have just hit on it. I was going to say, if there was one thing, right, that one key thing that you could tell government agencies or get them to think about as it relates to any of these things that we've talked about, what is that message that you want them to remember?
That it doesn't have to be as scary and as complicated as you think it is. And you don't have to stay locked into some of the legacy configurations that you're currently tied to. I've worked a lot of time in software companies. I'm going to say it over 15 years now, for different organizations. And a long time ago, I worked at Red Hat, and at that time, it was a good place to work. It was the open source company. Now it's become the Microsoft that they were trying to fight 15 years ago. But when you're locked into like something like OpenShift, it's not innovative technology, right? It's legacy technology that takes a lot of manpower and a lot of professional services, not only to install, but to maintain. You don't have to be locked into something like that now. You can have a simple tool like we have, be able to import that information, manage it, and then port your migrations away from OpenShift to something that's free. We have a distribution of Kubernetes. You can use ours. We don't really care. We barely have a name for them. It's just a bunch of letters because Gartner made us name it. But we don't care if you use ours as part of our platform or not. It's totally free. Um, but you just don't have to continue down that same path. And I've talked to some Navy programs about their OpenShift kind of configuration. I'm like, you guys are wasting $20-30 million a year for something that isn't innovative anymore.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good thing. And before we started, we were talking just briefly about the Broadcom VMware acquisition, and we are definitely seeing some pain in the market with how Broadcom is dealing with renewals on the VMware side. Um,
Mm.
one of the things I think is that might be interesting, and maybe discuss just a little bit about how Spectro Cloud can help organizations begin that process of migrating off some of these VMwares and containerizing and modernizing some of their legacy applications?
Yeah, so we provide an off-ramp called virtual machine orchestration. So it allows you, again, to import virtual machines along with other distributions, Kubernetes. We allow you to import virtual machine um, kind of applications into Spectro Cloud's palette. And by doing so, not only do we allow a single pane of glass again, but we allow you a bridge to move those virtual machine applications in the way that they're written over to a containerized type of application, while also giving you the overview of those both of those environments. So typically before, you would have to log into your virtual machine, was it Tanzu, vSphere, or something like that,
Yep, yep.
and then manage everything out of there. Now we allow you to do all that within Palette and then provide a bridge to say, all right, I'm going to decide when I need to migrate off of these VM licenses and then move them over to a containerized type of situation. Not only that, when we start deploying Kubernetes to direct to bare metal or using canonical MAS, you get rid of some of that VMware tax, right? So you don't need the hypervisors and a lot of their licensing to do that. So that's a cost savings right there. So there's a lot of different things that we can do within Palette. VMO is something that is certainly going to be high on the list because of the licensing, because of Broadcom, because of even some of the layoffs that's going on. There's a lot of, I guess, bad press around Broadcom and buying VMware. So the lot of uncertainty of what's happening provides kind of a way for us to come in and say, you should look at this, see if this meets your requirements, and gives you kind of that roadmap to get away from that and then start saving some money, but not lose any capabilities or any security or any flexibility with what you might want to do with modernization in 5 or 10 years.
Fantastic. Well, I think about out of time. I was just going to ask any last parting thoughts for us? Any words of wisdom?
There's a lot to cover, and I'm surprised I actually digest all this in my head. I do this quite often. But there's a lot to cover. There's a lot of capabilities, and even in an hour demo, we don't touch the surface of what Palette is capable of doing. So if you're looking for something that's different, but still provide that capability, that flexibility, that ease of use, which is super, super important. Ease of use. Take a look at Palette. Take a look at Spectro Cloud. See what we're doing. Look us up on LinkedIn. There's a lot of different things that we're being kind of recommended and accolades on, and there's a lot of people who are kind of standing up and taking notice of how we're doing things differently and why we're kind of on a rocket ship over here.
Fantastic. Well, Mike, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with Chet today. And folks, again, thanks for tuning in. And until next time, everybody have a great afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you.